Come on then, Mike. Tell me what fun you've had or seen on the internet this week.
Well, here's a fun one. The NBA championships. I don't know if you're a basketball fan at all. Are you? Do you?
I,
Do you?
I wish I was a basketball fan. I'm not.
Okay.
Teach me, school me on
So
what I need to know.
the finals, the NBA championship finals began last night, and the New York Knicks, which are my team from growing up, but who literally the last time they won a championship was the year before I was born,
Oh God.
are in the finals, which is
Ooh.
a little bit exciting because
Yeah.
when I was a kid, they were okay and they had a few good years, but it's been 20 something years since they were even remotely good. I mean, I guess last year they were all right, but they're in the finals. So I'm actually a little excited about it.
So
But
what's happened? What's the special sauce? What have they done?
they're just getting good players. I mean, that's the trick.
That old thing.
But the thing that I found this week online, which is perfect for the NBA championships, is a site called 82 and 0, 82-0.com. There are 82 games in a season in the NBA.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you sort of spin a wheel and it presents you a team and an era. So some decades, going back to, I think, the 60s. I don't know how far back it goes. And you have to pick one player from that team and that era and build out a team, and they have some system that will determine if it can go 82 and 0. So the goal is to try and build a team that would win every game.
Nice.
And it is difficult. And I have not gotten a team. I've gotten teams that were, good, but I've not gotten a team that is close to 82 and 0. And I do not have that much free time, but I am spending a lot of time trying to build a good all-time basketball team.
That sounds like an incredibly valuable use of anyone's time.
Absolutely.
Do you need to know about basketball? Can I have a go? Do you think I could?
You could go. You can figure out. I mean, you can figure out the basics pretty quickly. I mean, you want a team that scores a lot of points, but you have to be able to match positions. So, like I was playing with it earlier, and certain positions tend to score more points. So if you get someone who's kind of good, you put them in. But if you fill that spot, you can't fill it again later. So,
Right.
Shaquille O'Neal being a very famous basketball player. So
I'm familiar.
But he's a center, and I just got him the period when he was great, except I'd already filled the center position with a less good player and could not use Shaquille O'Neal. It was very disappointing.
I'm into fantasy football games, so that'll be up my street.
There you go. Check it out.
I will. I mean, I can't confess to being doing anything as quite as kind of analytical as that, but I did find a video that brought me immense joy this week. Obviously, now being a father, you get served all kinds of stuff on all kinds of platforms. And the video that I got kind of sent on Instagram, it's actually on my kind of For You page, my recommended page, was a toddler in a silent disco. Have you ever seen a toddler in a silent disco? It's the purest amount of joy you could ever see. And when I say silent disco, I mean, this is a 2-year-old wearing his dad's kind of running headphones and being played some sort of like Disney classics. The kind of whirling of the arms, the pumping of the body. It's honestly something kind of quite mesmerizing. And
you sent this to me a couple minutes ago, and I will say this kid is getting down. I mean, this kid is really feeling the music.
Yeah, it's flowing through every single sinew of his body, and he's completely kind of immersed in it. And obviously no one can hear, what he's listening to, and he's completely kind of incommunicado with his parents. So yeah, I think we should take that energy into today's podcast, basically. And let's see how it goes. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, the podcast where we make sense of the major debates shaping online speech, platform power, content moderation, and the future of the internet. It's June the 4th, 2026, and this week we're talking about Meta marking its own homework on teen safety, what the bricks in minifig story says about online speech, and for our Patreon subscribers, internet despotification and what to do about it. Don't have a drink before you say that one. Ctrl-Alt-Speech is the weekly therapy session of Mike Masnick, editor and founder of Techder, and me, Ben Whitelaw, founder and editor of Everything Moderation. You seem to like that one, Mike?
Weekly
therapy.
A good one. Yeah, it's a good one.
I think it's the nail on the head, pretty much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's more to say on that. But yeah, before we jump in, big love for our Patreon subscribers who have been both kind of keeping the lights on and also, supporting us in the early stages of this new experiment we've been running. We've been running our Patreon for 5 or 6 weeks now, and we have supporters who pay $10 a month to get extended episodes of our dulcet tones and occasionally some analysis as well. And our founders who, for this weekend only, actually, will get the honor of being one of our earliest supporters. Plus, they get the chance to have a direct line to us and send us stories that we can cover on the podcast. After this weekend, that founder tier will go slightly up in price and will become something a bit different. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast, if you've been listening a long time, now's your chance to
last chance
to claim that founder supporter title.
Yes.
I've heard it gets you into a lot of very exclusive clubs and venues, Mike. If you say that you're a founding Patreon supporter of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, I haven't verified that myself.
We need to have a special handshake, which we'll test out at TrustCon this year.
Yeah, exactly. I'll let you do that one first. And it goes without saying that if you're an organization or an institution who wants to reach our very attractive and clever audience by sponsoring an episode or 3, perhaps, you can go to Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com, find out more about our sponsorship offering, which is one of the best out there, I'd say, or by reaching out to Mike and I via our podcast at Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com email address. How's things this week, Mike? What's new in your world, apart from kind of being quite nervous about basketball, it sounds like?
Well, the Knicks won last night, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, what was it like before they won, though? Probably not great.
It was a little nerve-wracking because they were down by a lot, and they came back and won. But this is not a basketball podcast, so we're not going to go there. But no, it's been a busy week. We'll talk about it later. But I published a big piece this week, which has been making the rounds and getting plenty of attention, and I'm glad that that's out because I put a lot of time into that, and so that was big. And there's a whole bunch of other stories going on, some of which we'll be talking about. And so it has been, it's always a busy week, but this one feels particularly crazy. So how about you?
Yeah, it's been good. I've been kind of running around, went to a couple of events here in London, which was really interesting to speak to folks who are, deeply in the weeds on this stuff. And I think, you're going to talk us through some pretty high profile dramas, storylines that have been taking place this week that have a speech element, which is always fun. I like it when those are quite kind of quirky, nebulous world of online speech and internet regulation breaks out a little bit and reaches new audiences, as we'll discuss. We should get straight into it because we've got lots to discuss. And we're going to start, Mike, by talking a bit about product defaults. And that is not a reason for our listeners to switch off.
This audience gets it. I don't think you have to give that sort of, caveat.
No, maybe not. But I'm really fascinated by product defaults. I think they are, everyone thinks about internet speech and safety as about content moderation, as about policy. And product defaults are, obviously one of the kind of blanket ways, one of the kind of most impactful ways that you can change the way that a platform works and the way people behave on platforms. And I'm going to talk a bit about Meta. Do you remember last year when Meta announced some changes to how they were doing teen defaults? We talked a bit about it on the podcast.
We did.
And this was a fairly big story at the time. They essentially rolled out plans to have a new teen experience that meant that content was more suitable for teen users between kind of 13 and 18. And they were piloting this in the UK and the US, Australia, and Canada. This was a time when there was loads going on about teen safety. You had the Australia social media ban had been announced, but not kind of enacted. That was going to happen in December, a few months later. The Online Safety Act was being enforced, and there was a big focus on harming of children. You also had our good friend Jonathan Haidt doing many, many interviews in the media about his book, Gangster's Generation. And so there was this kind of cacophony of noise and pressure around child safety and particularly kind of Instagram's role in that, which has been long documented. Well, this week, Meta announced a plan to roll out that teen default to a larger audience, a more global audience, but also onto its other platforms, onto Messenger and to the main Facebook experience. So it's not something that's got loads of attention, but it's going to impact a significant number of users' experience on those three platforms, which we know are very widely used. I wanted to ask, Mike, did you come across this teen default? Did your kids kind of come to you and say, hey, my experience on these platforms has changed?
No, I had not. I had not actually realized until a little bit afterwards that this rollout had happened. I will note my kids don't really use social media that much. They're not as, beyond YouTube. YouTube is the experience that they enjoy, but they're not big Instagram. They're certainly not Facebook users. Nobody is.
Right, yeah.
But
that ship has sailed.
yeah, but they're not real Instagram users. So we didn't hear anything about it in terms of that aspect.
Fine. I was really interested in the kind of this announcement and the justification for rolling out this new experience to so many users globally. And I'm going to talk a bit about the stress test that basically Meta ran. It says it did a study, but as we'll talk about, it's not a particularly academic one or very robust. And then I want to talk about what I think it kind of says about the nature of Meta and how it thinks about teen safety at the moment. So just to give you the background, Meta ran, it calls a study with a company called Alice. Alice is a well-known trust and safety vendor, technology company. It used to be called ActiveFence. My sense, I don't know for sure, but I think they have a long-standing relationship with Meta. They have been a vendor of Meta's trust and safety team for a while, is my guess. They've worked with a lot of big platforms. And anyway, Meta worked with them on this study to validate the teen default experience and whether it actually did the job of reducing harmful content in those teen accounts feeds, but also in search and in Reels and all those other different interfaces that you have on Instagram, because it's not just the feed. The way they did that was by creating 36 different accounts as 14-year-olds. Okay, so they created 12 with the kind of new teen default experience. They created 12 with Meta's limited content experience, which is something that it rolled out as well, which allowed parents to basically take a kind of stricter view of content that the teens saw on Instagram. And then it also created 12 accounts on what it calls a competing platform, which I'm assuming is TikTok. It's not mentioned.
Yeah.
But my guess is that it's TikTok or rhymes with TikTok.
Scouring the details to try and find any hint of who it would be, but the list is very short of who you could consider it to be, and TikTok is the obvious one. So it's almost certainly TikTok. Yeah. And I would actually argue if it's not TikTok, then it's misleading.
Yeah.
Because in terms of similar experiences, there's really only TikTok, and anyone else, the context would be very different.
Agreed. And so they created these accounts, and I think what they're trying to show is that this new teen default is both safer and more robust for teens than this unnamed competitor. So the fact that they don't name it is certainly kind of undercuts the reason for doing the research, I think. But nonetheless, they prime these accounts, by which they mean that they try to get them to behave in different ways. So they follow certain accounts and they get the accounts to be either a kind of normal 14-year-old who likes sports or likes books or likes food, or they get the accounts they prime them to kind of seek out content that is less suitable for teenagers. And they specify those different categories: suicide and self-harming, substance abuse, risky behaviors, sexually suggestive content. And so you have these kind of cohorts of different accounts that are essentially designed to act in different ways. And the study is then on the basis of that priming to see what content comes through on the feeds and in the search results. It's essentially kind of trying to audit the algorithmic recommendations of these new accounts, this new account status. And they view almost 17,000 pieces of content, Mike, and they categorize that content. They label it as either potentially mature or benign. And unsurprisingly, I don't think anybody will be that shocked to hear that the kind of key finding is that the prevalence of mature content of this new teen default kind of account is much less than the competitor. Basically, the change has worked in terms of reducing the likelihood that a teen will come across more adult content. And that's even more so if the account has been put into a limited content mode, i.e. a parent has kind of said, you're going to have a more restricted experience than the default. And the numbers, are impressive, 68%, 96%. And that's the basis on which they basically rolled this new teen default out globally. So that, you could say, Mike, that this is a piece of work done fairly well. A company getting an external party to audit an experience before rolling it out. There's a school of thought that says that this is Meta doing something right. Before I kind of give you my maybe more cynical take, what was your sense on the numbers and the kind of methodology side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting, right? I mean, I think, one of the things that I imagine most listeners to this podcast recognize is that it is not that companies don't take child safety seriously at all, that there are certainly people within these companies. There may be questions about priorities and resource allocation and all that kind of stuff. But there are people within all these companies who do look seriously at how do we limit the potential for any harm related to children or for any users. That is the entire purpose of a trust and safety role. And so the difficulty is in, some of those other questions around resource allocation and prioritization and how do these things impact other aspects. And also in the fact that it is a very complex topic area where decisions are not clear cut, and doing one thing helps in some ways and harms another. And as we always say, includes trade-offs, right? So each one of these decisions includes trade-offs. But it is interesting to me to see how the different companies think about these things and how they approach them. And so I found this interesting to just as a thought process and as a mental experiment to like, how would you actually measure these things? Is interesting to see the methodology that Alice came up with and how they implemented it and tried it out. I am not convinced that it is the most effective or that it is particularly telling in terms of what impact it will actually have on safety versus what safety story they can tell to regulators and to the media, which I think is sort of kind of the overriding part of it. But there are interesting things in here, and I'm not trying to dismiss the entire study entirely. It's interesting to see how they went about it and the different choices that they made, but they are choices, and you would get different results if you made different choices within that process.
Yeah, agreed. And, there's, I guess, a world in which the report isn't published for us to read.
Yep.
Maybe the partner, in this case, Alice, that they worked with isn't named, and it becomes even more of a black box decision, which would not be a great thing. But yeah, I agree with you that there's those headline numbers of the kind of reduction in prevalence of content in Instagram that might affect teen users is what was kind of announced. It's what they're going to go to the press and try to kind of share as a story. It's what they're going to talk to regulators about. We did this piece of work in October last year. It's had this material impact. This third party says so. There's a couple of parts that I struggle with a little bit. One really interesting aspect, which I'm sure you will have thoughts on, is the movie ratings element of this study. So as well as kind of comparing the prevalence of mature content on Instagram to this unnamed platform, it also does so to films.
Yes.
It kind of draws that distinction between content on social media and content in films. And it does that by scraping a lot of data and comments from IMDb. I won't go into the exact details, but it's an attempt essentially to say that social media content isn't really as bad, or it's actually no worse than content that people are letting their children see of 13 plus films. And this is something that goes back to the announcement back in October, where there was this feeling that talking about social media content in the way that we talk about films gives people a framing that they understand. Parents know that when they see a film that's 13 plus or 15 or 18 or whatever it is in the US, I forget, they're kind of clear on the decisions that they're making as to whether they allow their child to watch this content. Maybe social media could do something similar and alleviate some of the pressures the platforms are facing. The Alice report goes back to that idea in a fairly unconvincing way by scraping lots of data from IMDb and trying to kind of make that distinction again. What did you make of that? How did that feel to you?
I mean, there are a couple of things. So one, if you remember when they first announced this plan, they actually used the framing of the movie rating system and called it PG-13, which is what the US rating is for recommended that you be at least 13 to see the content. Yeah. And the Motion Picture Association, the MPA, got very upset about this. And there was a lot of back and forth. And eventually there was a settlement of some kind that Meta would not use that framing of PG-13. And in fact, in their release on this announcement, even though they just talk about 13 plus, not PG-13, there is this note at the bottom that there's a lot of differences between social media and movies. And we didn't work with the MPA when updating our content settings. And basically like, we've made it clear, like, we are not associated with it, which is kind of funny. But, I think as we pointed out at the time when that first came out and they used the sort of PG-13 rating, it's like, that is a very different context. And I don't think it applies. And I think, sort of going back to it here, other than to try and associate, to make that connection in the minds of parents or media or regulators that, okay, we let teenagers see some content that is a little bit more mature because we have these movie rating systems. Other than that, it just feels really irrelevant. Like it's such a different context and it's such different types of content that the only purpose in sort of going back to the movie example is just to like prime people to believe like, well, we recognize that there's different kinds of content that teenagers can be able to see, even if younger people we don't think is appropriate for them.
Mhm.
But other than that, like it just feels different and it just doesn't feel like a useful comparison beyond the simple priming aspect of it.
Yeah, whether the Motion Picture Association were keen for it
Yeah.
or not, I don't think it works, as you say. But the fact that they squashed it pretty quickly, I think, made that decision for them. So there is that element which feels odd, and I would recommend listeners going and, if they have time, digging into the methodology there. There's a lot of interesting kind of nuance. The other part was what happens after Alice came up with the data and basically figured out that there were some opportunities for Meta to improve. They highlighted essentially two areas that Meta should address. And one of those was that there was a bunch of 18 plus accounts that these teen default accounts could access still. No one really understands how. Apparently it was due to a kind of model error, it was described as. And so, if you're 14, you can see accounts that are 18 plus. That's obviously not good. And so Meta very quickly closed that loophole. There's also they identified a policy gap around what's called car surfing. I never knew you could surf a car, Mike, but apparently it's a big thing now.
Thing. It is a thing. I was aware of it.
Are you a regular car surfer?
I am not. And I would recommend to our listeners that you do not engage in car surfing. It is a very stupid and very dangerous practice.
Yeah. Don't say you heard about it here. But, having seen obviously a bunch of content being recommended to these 14-year-old accounts, Alice was able to say you should create a policy that doesn't allow these users to see this content, and Meta quickly closed that loophole. Now, that's, again, a positive reaction from a platform in response to new information and data, and you could see it as such. However, if I was, for example, the oversight board, Mike, the Supreme Court style content moderation group of experts who frequently engage with Meta and who provide recommendations on the platform, I would be pretty annoyed about the fact that Meta have made some changes in relation to their own data, but not to stuff that the oversight board have brought to them. Similarly, with other third-party organizations like the out-of-court dispute settlement bodies, which are part of the DSA regulation in Europe, they're frequently saying Meta is not engaging with us as much as we'd like on some of these key topics. And here we have Meta making some very swift changes to data that they've commissioned for themselves. So I think there's a slight double standard here, Mark, when it comes to changes that Meta is making in relation to data that they have commissioned or that these very close party vendors have brought to them, and less so with these bodies like the Oversight Board, who are trying to make changes on the platform, but struggling to get the engagement they'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the interesting thing, right? So you have the Oversight Board in particular, which is staffed by a bunch of human rights experts and people who have thought deeply about these things and have sort of deep philosophical, careful takes on, how do we balance the different interests of different people. That is a very different situation than Meta going out, hiring a company and saying, basically, do this particular safety audit to effectively say that what we're doing is working. And this sort of gets at one of the things in looking at this overall report that gets to a deeper issue where you can say, okay, we reduced access to this content by X percentage or whatever. There's no indication of, did that stop any actual harm? Because there's a question of seeing this content, accessing this content, and the actual impact on harm. And also, like, if you are blocking this content, are you also blocking other content, right? I mean, the trade-off situation comes up all the time where we're talking about, the example often is with suicide related content? If somebody is looking for resources, are you giving them help, or are you just cutting them off entirely, which could make situations worse? We have none of that sort of thoughtful analysis. That's the kind of thing where outside experts could look at these things and explore the trade-offs. This report doesn't do that. It just comes up with we reduced access to this amount of content without then any further analysis in terms of what is the actual impact of that. And so in that sense, when you look at it that way, you say this report, even though there may be some impact on safety, we don't know that from this report. We know it reduced access to this content. Does that actually increase safety? We don't know. And that would be a more interesting look. And that's something where an outside body that has other types of expertise, I think would be more interesting. And that's why this feels like, even though there are some interesting things here and it could lead to a safer platform, we don't know that from this data and this report. And that's why it feels more like a PR exercise than a real safety exercise.
Yeah, agreed. And it's not even a comparison to a pre-October 2025 benchmark.
Yeah.
There's no, we did this back in October before we launched teen defaults, and this is what it looks like now. It's comparing kind of apples with oranges in a way. It's looking at the kind of prevalence of a completely different platform.
Yes, with completely different standards. And again, because I don't even name the platform, again, we're sort of assuming that it's TikTok. But if you wanted to goose the numbers, like pick X as the competitor platform, right? Like you could pick a platform to make the meta numbers look better if you wanted to. Yeah. And I'm not saying that they necessarily did that, but there's a limited number of platforms and you can make choices that would impact these numbers greatly.
Yeah, I agree. So that was my big interesting story this week. I think, product defaults, not always interesting, not always sexy, but I think in this case, the data we have about it made it a little bit more interesting, I think, than the average.
I do think it will be worth watching, right? If they're rolling this out more broadly, let's find out what the actual impact is. And there should be more data going forward. And hopefully it means that also outside researchers, academic researchers at universities and elsewhere can now do some comparative research themselves on the data that is available to people outside. It's a little bit more difficult, obviously, if you're outside, but we do have a sort of before and after, and maybe we'll see some other evidence show up somewhere else as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to, as with our new format, Mike, talk about our second big story in the Patreon episode, which is coming up. Before we do so, we wanted to run through a couple of eye-catching stories that we both spotted, that we found interesting. And talking of Meta, you wanted to bring about a story that doesn't necessarily reflect that well on its use of AI.
Oh, yeah. So this story made the rounds this week. It was sort of noticed over the weekend that a couple of high-profile Instagram accounts were hacked, including the Obama White House account and the Chief Master Sergeant of the U.S. Space Force, because now we have a Space Force, Ben. And
About time.
Yeah. And what came out was that effectively Meta has been relying more and more on AI tools for a variety of things. And one of those is for customer support. And that's not unique. Lots of companies are experimenting with these things. But, apparently they've given that AI-powered customer service tremendous power. And some people figured out, and it was apparently making the rounds in various hacker circles on Telegram, that you could trick the AI customer support at Meta in ways that would effectively allow you to take over an account. The full methods, reporters are being pretty good about hiding it. I've read a few different articles on it. The one I really liked is the Krebs on security, because I think he's always very thorough and thoughtful in his write-up on things. But effectively, what you do is you use a VPN to show up in an IP address that is in a similar location as that account would normally be, because apparently there is some geographical check, and you convince the AI through a prompt injection that you need to change the email address that is associated with the account. And then you change it to one that you control. And then you can reset the password because you have the email address, and you can take over the account that way. That is really bad. There's no two ways about it. And there's lots of talk about how with AI systems, the big risk is prompt injection, which is, it's sort of the modern version of what used to be called social engineering, except instead of tricking a human being into doing what you want, you're tricking an AI. And there are tricks that work. These are systems that are not determinative, and you can figure out ways to effectively jailbreak their controls and get around them. And in this case, it feels like this one should be a fairly obvious one to make sure it's locked down, and
Yeah.
Meta failed to do so. But this certainly raises on the trust and safety angle as people are rolling out more and more of these AI tools to do different things, figuring out how to really thoroughly lock them down and have guardrails against this stuff, especially against prompt injection within a customer service arena, becomes a bigger and bigger deal.
And it's not as if those accounts are easy to get back.
Yeah.
In non-AI hacking situations, if you just lose your account, or there's an old-fashioned hacker who's managed to use social engineering to get access to your account, it's really tough actually to get your account back. It's happened to me once, and we talked about it before. Meta doesn't have a very good kind of customer support service.
Yeah.
So if it's going to happen at a scale that we've never seen before.
And in theory, right, I mean, that's why the use of the AI as customer service itself is interesting, because, the technology industry has never been particularly good at customer service. I used to joke about how Google's customer service was just like a giant white monolith. Like there was no way to reach anybody there ever if you had a problem. I think they've gotten much better about that over the years. But same thing, customer service has never been a focus of the big internet companies, certainly. And so there is a world in which you look at this and you say, oh, well, this is interesting because they can effectively staff up their customer service so that customer service can actually be more responsive, because the AI can take on the work that they didn't have human staffing to do before. But it has to work and it has to be secure. And if you can do something that feels as obviously bad as this, it suggests that they haven't really thought through the guardrails of how the AI within the customer service realm should be working.
Yeah, I agree. A little bit worrying, but yeah, part of the course right now.
Yes.
Everyone can have their accounts taken over at any given time. Keep an eye out, everyone. I was going to talk a bit about an FT story, Mike, but I want to jump to probably the big narrative on the internet this week, I'd say. I'll include the FT story in the show notes. It's a kind of interesting story that builds on what you've been talking about AI. But we want to spend a few minutes about this Lego dispute. And I'll be honest, when you brought this to me earlier today and said, this is what I'm talking about, I was like, what the hell is bricks and minifigs? I've completely not paid attention to this whatsoever. And luckily, your very long article that helped give me some background. But break it down for us and talk a bit about the kind of online speech aspect.
Again, let's be clear. This is one of our shorter stories. To accurately explain all of the details here would take more than I think we've ever recorded. So much of the discussion is also happening in really long YouTube videos and competing videos and different viewpoints. There is a huge mess here, most of which we are not going to talk about. So I'm going to skip over and get past a whole bunch of things. There is an underlying dispute which went completely mega viral all across the internet. My kids are talking to me about it, which is like to give you a sense of like how far this has spread, of a guy in Oregon who had his father actually had collected over a period of decades a very large and fairly valuable collection of Star Wars Lego kits. And they decided to sell it off to help for the grandkids' college. And they went to a store called Bricks and Minifigs, which is a franchise operation. There's a whole bunch of them where you can buy and sell different Lego pieces. I had not been aware of its existence prior to a couple weeks ago, but they have about 300 stores around the US mainly.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah, I'm not as big into the Lego world, I guess. But anyways, it's a, there's a series of stores and you can buy and sell your Legos, but this was a deal, it was a consignment deal, which is, technically he still owns it. They're selling it on his behalf, and they had advertised it, and there was a whole big thing. There was a big issue where the franchise owners who had signed this consignment deal wanted to get out of their store and wanted to either sell it or shut it down or whatever. And skipping over a whole bunch of partially important details, the Bricks and Minifigs corporate showed up, took over the store with almost no notice, literally showed up, kicked the people out of the store, demanded the keys, and said, we're taking over. And caught on video, the owner says, well, I have this big consignment with all these Legos and I owe this guy money. It's not ours. It's not our inventory. And they said, it's okay. We'll accept it and we'll take on that liability. And then basically said, no, these bricks are ours. There's a whole bunch more that has happened, and there were threats of lawsuits and this and that. But basically the company was trying to get away with taking the remaining Legos. Then enter another Ben, not you, but a Ben named Ben Schneider, who has a YouTube account called Reckless Ben, who does these sort of crazy stunt things. In my mind, they're a little bit cringy, but he goes to extreme lengths to expose things. And I think his heart is in the right place. His brain may not be. And so he found
I'm
out,
up to speed.
Yeah, he found out about this story and he was just like, I'm going to get back these Legos. And then went to extraordinary lengths. I mean, this is where, I'm not going to get into any of the details of this at all, but at one point he registers a fake religion, sets up a lottery system, sets up multiple other companies, sets up a franchising system for his other companies, prints fake signs. He's based in LA, I think, or Southern California somewhere. He goes up to Oregon multiple times. He goes to Utah multiple times. He confronts people. He sets up fake contracts. There are layers upon layers upon layers, all of which is too much to get into. So it went viral about a week ago because of his videos. And it also turns out he gets arrested multiple times. He gets backed off by police, all these things. There are now state lawsuits in Utah mainly that have been filed. There have been a whole bunch of small claims lawsuits that have been filed. But let's get to the online speech component of this.
Okay, I'm ready for it. I'm excited.
Which is, well, first of all, the aspect that something bad definitely happened here. And the guy who was the victim, the original owner of the Lego sets, had really no recourse. And that comes out very clearly. He sort of went to lawyers and they basically said it would be more expensive for us to help you than we would get back from the company. And so the only remedy was this online speech aspect, that someone as crazy as Reckless Ben would go do reckless things and draw attention to it. And that is fascinating because it's a different thing that, the way the world works today, the ability of a random, wacky, sort of cringy YouTuber to draw attention to something is fascinating. And to actually make change in the world, I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, we're not past that point, are we? Like, I thought that was something that was kind of prevalent 15 years ago, maybe on the internet. But and I thought maybe it didn't exist anymore, but just Ben has shown us it's possible.
It is totally possible. And as I was mentioning to you before, like now this has just become a competing series of YouTube videos, and my YouTube algorithm is now completely overtaken with videos about this account. Then the final point is that because the different lawsuits have been filed, there's a big one in Utah, which was filed by the Bricks and Minifigs corporate against Ben and co-conspirators. It's a RICO conspiracy case, among other things. And they were able to get a temporary restraining order, which is way too broad and clearly violates the First Amendment. And it orders a bunch of things that are potentially legitimate. Ben has to stay away from some of the people involved. He can't trespass on their properties. So all of these kinds of things. But it also requires him to take down all of his videos and to shut down his Patreon account. And so the lawyers, which is a big time law firm, Denton's, for the Bricks and Minifigs corporate, they sent these temporary restraining orders to, I believe, YouTube and to Patreon. We don't know. The videos are still up, so clearly YouTube didn't take them down. But Patreon CEO, Jack Conte, put out a video. It's a 50-second video, and it's so good that we're going to play it right now.
Dear creator community, my name is Jack Conte, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Patreon. On May 29th, Patreon received an official takedown request filed by Bricks and Minifigs for media and accounts related to Reckless Ben and an ongoing dispute regarding a local Lego consignment issue. This is the verified complaint with exhibits. This is the request for immediate content removal pursuant to temporary restraining order. And this is the motion for the temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. So after an extensive review and investigation by Patreon's Trust and Safety team, we have in fact unfortunately determined that Bricks and Minifigs can stuff it. We're keeping Ben's page up. And if Bricks and Minifigs doesn't like that, they can sue us. Patreon out.
So if you heard that video, that is Jack Conte, CEO of Patreon, basically saying, yes, we received this. And as you heard, telling Bricks and Minifigs to stuff it.
Yeah. Go suck it.
Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating to sort of join in the sort of viral video aspect of this, but like there is a real legal thing to this, which is he's right. If they want Patreon to be required to take down a temporary restraining order, he's not a party to the lawsuit. So the only way he gets to be a party to the lawsuit is if they sue. And he tells them like, if you want to sue us, go ahead and sue us.
Right.
And so This is why things like Section 230 exist, to say, that you're protected. You can't be forced to remove content unless you're a party to the lawsuit, and then other things have to happen. The First Amendment protects this speech, and you can't do this sort of prior restraint of saying, like, you are required to take this down. And so despite all the other crazy things involved, at the heart of this is an internet speech case.
Yeah. And it's good to see actually a CEO come out and I suppose essentially kind of back what is essentially a trust and safety decision, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of publicly and vocally explain, maybe not explain the decision making behind it, but at least pin the kind of colors to the mast as to say, we're not taking this down. This is too broad. This is unnecessary. And we back ourselves to that we're on the right side here. That doesn't often happen. CEOs often kind of hide in the shadows when making such decisions. So yeah, fair play to the CEO of Patreon for doing that. We might have come to the kind of end of the regular episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. This episode will always be available to listeners on all the major podcast platforms. We are now going to segue neatly into the extended version of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, the plus version, the extended part of it. And Mike and I are going to go deep into his latest essay, which builds on a lot of his work that he's been doing over TikTok over many years. And it's a kind of, I would say, like a kind of descendant essay of your Platforms, Not Protocols paper that you wrote.
Yeah,
which
and
we can talk a bit more about
and
that.
specifically about sort of the impact on centralized systems and democracy. So broadening it out beyond just like the impact on social media, but rather society at large, and why the architecture of platforms matter for society and democratic values. And so I think we'll have a good, deeper discussion on that.
Yeah, and before we go over to that episode, Mike, just explain how it came about, because I think people might be interested in a bit of that.
Yeah, this is published on liberalism.org, which is a relatively new online website that is focused on sort of liberal values is the concept. And they had reached out to me a few months ago and said, would you write something on decentralization and democracy, was basically the framing that they gave me. And I said, sure, I'll have something for you next week. And that was 3 months ago. It turns out that writing this piece was really, I went deep to actually write it. And the more that I wrote, the more I realized like, oh, I have a lot to say here. And it's a difficult one to get out in the right way. And so I wrote it and I rewrote it and I wrote it again. And at one point it was up around 5,000 words. The final piece is about 2,500. So I cut out a lot. It was a struggle to get this piece into the shape that it's in, but I'm very, very proud of the end result, which I think I've been hearing from a lot of people. I think it's a useful way of thinking about the internet and the infrastructure that we build and what that means for our society.
Okay, great. Let's get into the details.
That's the end of this week's free edition of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. To hear the extended episode with additional coverage, become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech. That's CTRL-Alt-Speech. If your organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us via our website at Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Thanks for listening.